3 military officers stood outside my apartment at 6:01 a.m. Dress, uniforms, medals, catching the hallway light, a colonel already holding a folder with my name on it. I was still in scrubs. Coffee spilled on the counter. My heart slammed once and didn't slow. "Maya Reynolds," he said. Not a question. I thought of the bus stop, of the old man's hands shaking as I passed him a thermos, of the morning he collapsed in my arms while strangers stared and kept walking. "Yes," I said. "We're here about Thomas Hale." The name felt wrong, too clean, too official. "Is he—" I couldn't finish. The colonel didn't answer. He opened the folder. Every page was slashed with black ink, classified, stamped, heavy. "What did I do?" I asked. "I just brought him breakfast." He looked at me measured and careful. "You mailed a letter. That letter triggered an inspector general investigation." My knees went weak. "We need you to come with us," he added, immediately. And as I stepped into the hallway barefoot, I realized the man everyone ignored wasn't just forgotten, he was erased on purpose. They didn't ask if they could come in. The colonel stepped over my threshold, like my apartment was already part of the briefing. He didn't sit. He didn't soften his voice. He opened the folder and began listing dates clinical exact, like reading vitals off a chart. Thomas Hale was admitted twice under unidentified status. His records were flagged. Then they disappeared. I told him I wasn't family, that I was a nurse, that I met Thomas at a bus stop because my shift started at 6:30 and his mornings started there too. I said I brought him breakfast because it was easier than looking away. "That's the problem," the colonel replied. "The system did look away." He explained it without apology. Hale's service record was classified. His discharge existed, but the follow-up didn't. When databases don't sync, benefits don't trigger. When benefits don't trigger, people fall off the map. No alerts. No caseworker, no second check. I asked why no one fixed it. "Because no one noticed," he said, "until you mailed the letter." That was when I understood the antagonist wasn't a person, it was a process. A maze of forms that treats silence as resolution. A bureaucracy that mistakes missing data for missing people. "You didn't break any rules," the colonel added. "You exposed a gap." I thought about the mornings I'd stood 10 minutes too long at that bus stop, about how close Thomas came to dying unnamed, and how many others never had someone stop long enough to be counted. The bus stop was never quiet, but it had its own rhythm. Shoes on concrete, engines idling, people staring at their phones like eye contact might cost them something. Thomas sat against the brick wall, with his back straight, blanket folded instead of wrapped. He always folded it. Like order mattered even when nothing else did. The first time someone kicked it, I was mid-sentence telling him about a patient who'd yelled at me for taking too long with vitals. The shoe came out of nowhere, polished, expensive, sending the blanket sliding into the gutter. "Hey," I snapped. The man didn't stop. "He's blocking the sidewalk." "That's a person," I said, loud enough that people turned. Thomas didn't argue. He just reached for the blanket, hands shaking as he pulled it back from the dirty water. I knelt without thinking and helped him wring it out. It smelled like exhaust and mildew. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "Yeah," I said, standing. "I did." After that, it was smaller things. People stepping too close, someone muttering, "Get a job." A security guard from the closed laundromat telling him to move along even though there was nowhere to move to. Thomas never reacted, not once. He thanked me for the coffee every morning like it was a favor I was doing him, not a habit I couldn't break. "You've got a fight in you," he said one morning, watching me glare at a man who stared too long. "That's good." For what I asked? He smiled, thin and knowing. "You'll see." I didn't think much of it then. I was focused on the clock, on catching the 6:30 bus, on getting to the hospital before Mrs. Carter noticed I hadn't eaten again. Bringing Thomas breakfast wasn't charity. Charity implies extra. This was routine. This was part of my morning, like tying my shoes or checking my phone. And routines are easy to defend, until they aren't. The morning Thomas didn't show up, I stood there longer than I should have. The cardboard was gone. The trash bag with his things gone. Even the dark outline on the concrete where he usually sat had faded. I missed the first bus, then the second. By the time I got on the third, my hands were shaking, and I told myself what everyone tells themselves: people move. Cops clear areas. It doesn't mean anything. It meant something. By the third day, I was checking shelters after my grocery shift, feet aching, scrubs still smelling like bleach. Mercy Street didn't have him. Neither did the intake desk at the other shelter across town. "We don't track people who don't check in," the woman said, already turning back to her screen. "He's older," I said. "White, late 60s, sleeps near Clayton." She sighed, typed half-heartedly, shook her head. "Nothing. Hospitals were worse. Privacy laws. No ID, no patient number. You family? They asked. No. Then we can't help you. By the 5th day, the knot in my chest felt physical, like something pressing inward every time I tried to breathe. I left a paper bag at the bus stop with a note, "Hope you're okay," then hated myself for how useless it felt. When he came back, I almost missed him. He was thinner, paler, sitting like the effort cost him more now. I got off the bus at the next stop and ran back. Thomas. He looked up, slow eyes unfocused for a second, then recognition softened his face. "Miss Maya. Where were you?" The words came out sharper than I meant. "I checked shelters, hospitals. Had a spell," he said. His voice was rough. "I'm up right now. That's something." I crouched and noticed his hand. A clean scar across the back of it, pink, surgical. What happened? He pulled his sleeve down too fast. Old thing acting up. I knew what hospital scars looked like. I worked around them every day. "Thomas, I'm fine," he said. Final. We sat in silence until he reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. My name was written on it in careful, shaky letters. "If something happens to me," he said, "you mail this." "What do you mean, something happens?" My stomach tightened. "Promise me." I didn't like the weight of it, the way it felt like a responsibility I hadn't agreed to. But I took it. "I promise." He nodded once, like that settled something important. 2 weeks later, he collapsed. Not gently, not gradually. 1 second, he was holding the thermos. The next, his hand shook so hard, it slipped coffee splashing across the sidewalk as his knees buckled. I caught him before his head hit. I yelled for someone to call 911. A woman did. A jogger slowed, then kept running. I lowered Thomas onto his side, checking his airway the way training takes over when fear can't. "Stay with me," I whispered. At the hospital, intake moved fast until it didn't. "No insurance, no ID, no emergency contact," the woman said. "We'll transfer him to county overflow." "He's a veteran," I said. "Proof I don't have it." "Then I can't check." I lied. Said I was his niece. Leaned forward and begged a courtesy search. A doctor overheard. Told her to run it. When the screen changed, everything changed. "Match," she said quietly. "Honorable discharge." Then she scrolled. Her face tightened. "His service record is heavily redacted." The room went still. And for the first time, I realized Thomas hadn't been telling stories. He'd been telling the truth, and the system had decided that truth was easier to lose than to deal with. Thomas survived the night. Barely. He was transferred to a VA facility on the edge of the city 2 days later, 2 buses and a long walk from my apartment. I visited when I could, squeezing trips between double shifts and night classes. He looked better with real meals and medication, but something about him felt thinner, like the effort of staying present was costing him more now. One afternoon I found him sitting upright in bed, with a notebook open on his lap. He was writing slowly, carefully, pausing between lines like each word had weight. "What's that?" I asked. "My memories," he said, "the ones that matter." I watched his hand shake as he wrote names, dates, places, strings of numbers I didn't understand. Some entries were neat. Others looked rushed, almost panicked. He closed the notebook and handed it to me. "I want you to keep this." For what I asked. "If anyone ever asks," he said, "you'll know what's real." I didn't argue. I slipped the notebook into my bag next to the sealed envelope. 2 objects I didn't understand, but felt responsible for. That responsibility hit hard a week later. I got the call at 6:00 a.m., standing in my kitchen making instant coffee. The facility's number lit up my phone. "Miss Reynolds," the nurse said gently, "I'm sorry." Thomas passed in his sleep. I sat on the floor and let the coffee burn on the hot plate until the smell filled the apartment. At the VA, they handed me a plastic bag. His clothes, the blanket I'd bought him, the notebook, and another envelope addressed to me in his handwriting. Inside was a photograph. Thomas, decades younger, in full dress uniform, medals across his chest, 2 men in suits beside him, one I recognized immediately from the news. On the back, 3 words were written in shaky ink: "Remember, the girl." I opened the sealed envelope that night. The letter inside wasn't long. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise. He wrote about classified missions, about being discharged quietly, about paperwork lost during a system transition, about disappearing while still alive. And then he wrote about me, not as a hero, just as someone who showed up. That was when the stakes shifted from personal grief to something heavier. This wasn't a sad story. It was evidence. I mailed the letter the next morning. I almost didn't. Standing at the post office counter, envelope in hand, I felt stupid, small, like I was sending something important into a system designed to swallow it. But I'd promised. 2 weeks passed. Then the knock came. After the officers left my apartment, they didn't take me to a station. They took me to a conference room in a federal building I'd only ever driven past. Colonel Brooks laid the file on the table between us. Thomas Hale's record should never have gone dark, he said. But classified service creates blind spots. His benefits never triggered automatic follow-up. So, no one checked, I said. He nodded. No one until your letter reached the Inspector General. He slid a document toward me. An audit summary. Redactions everywhere. But the timeline was clear. Discharge. Missed verification. Case closed by default. Default meant homeless. Default meant dying unnamed. We're reviewing 47 similar cases, the colonel continued. Possibly more. I stared at the page. Why me? Because you're not part of the system, he said, and because you documented what it looks like when it fails. They asked me to recount everything. The bus stop, the ER intake, the attempted transfer, the moment the VA record changed how people treated him. No speeches, no emotion, just facts. That afternoon, I was told to be available, to not speak publicly, to prepare for formal testimony. Testimony where I asked. The colonel didn't answer right away. Then, the Senate. The preparation started immediately. Calls, briefings, lawyers who spoke in clean sentences and asked me to repeat my answers until they were airtight. Stick to what you saw, one said, not what you think. What I saw is the problem, I replied. They scheduled the hearing for October. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I lay on a hotel bed softer than anything I'd owned, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thomas folding his blanket like it mattered, about how close he came to vanishing without a trace. In the morning, I sat outside the committee room while cameras were set up inside. Senators' names were printed on placards. Staffers moved quickly, avoiding eye contact. A general stepped out and nodded at me. "It's time," she said. As I stood, I realized there was no stepping back now. Whatever happened in that room would decide whether Thomas was an exception or proof. And as the doors opened and the microphones came alive, I understood something clearly for the first time. The system hadn't failed quietly. It had failed because it was allowed to, and in a few minutes it was going to have to answer for that out loud. The Senate hearing room felt colder than it should have. Cameras lined the back wall. Reporters whispered. Staffers slid papers across polished desks as senators took their seats without looking at me. I sat at the witness table, hands flat, waiting. The chair recognized the Inspector General first. General Eleanor Whitman didn't waste time. She stood, stated her name, and opened Thomas Hale's file. George Thomas Hale served this country in classified operations for over 2 decades, she said. He did not die overseas. He died at a bus stop after the system failed to track him. A low murmur rolled through the room. One senator leaned forward. "General, are you saying the VA lost him?" "I'm saying the VA closed his case by default," Whitman replied. "No follow-up, no escalation, no human review." Another senator glanced at me for the first time. "And this witness," Whitman turned. "She is the only reason we know he existed." That was when the room finally focused. And that was when I realized it could still turn against me. When it was my turn, I didn't read from the prepared statement. I told them exactly what happened. I described the bus stop, the morning routine, the ER intake desk where Thomas was labeled unidentified. The moment the tone changed after the VA match appeared on the screen, I didn't accuse anyone, I didn't raise my voice. I let the timeline do the work. The Inspector General displayed the audit summary behind me. Dates lined up, gaps circled in red, 47 similar cases flagged. A senator tried to interrupt. "Miss Reynolds, are you qualified to—" "I'm a nurse," I said. "I'm qualified to recognize when someone is being transferred because it's easier than helping them." Silence. Another senator asked quieter this time, "Did Mr. Hale ever ask for recognition?" "No," I said. "He asked me to mail a letter." The photo appeared on the screen. Thomas in uniform, medals visible, faces beside him blurred. No one spoke. The attempt to deflect came late and failed. One senator framed it as a data problem. Another called it an unfortunate exception. Whitman stood again. "It is neither," she said. "It is systemic neglect." She announced the findings: misaligned databases for classified service records, no mandatory human review, no trigger for welfare checks when benefits lapse. Then she announced the consequences: an immediate Inspector General task force, a mandatory reconciliation process for classified veterans, a dedicated budget allocation, low 7 figures for emergency intervention and tracking, and effective. Today, she added, no veteran with classified service will be closed by default, ever. The room shifted. Staffers started typing. Reporters leaned forward. A senator asked, and the witness Whitman looked at me. "Miss Reynolds will serve as a civilian liaison, Oversight, not optics. I hadn't expected that. The gavel came down. The hearing adjourned. As the room emptied, I stayed seated for a second longer than necessary. Thomas hadn't been there to hear it, but for the first time, the system had said his name out loud on record and without erasing him again. The hallway outside the hearing room emptied slowly, like the building itself was exhaling. Senators disappeared behind private doors. Reporters clustered and then peeled away. I stayed where I was, leaning against the cool marble wall badge still clipped to my jacket, hands finally starting to steady. A staffer I didn't recognize paused, nodded once, and said, "Thank you for saying it plainly." Another passed and murmured, "I'm sorry it took this long." The noise softened. The tension I'd been bracing against for months loosened in my chest. I thought about the bus stop at dawn, the 10 minutes I used to steal every morning, the way Thomas folded his blanket like it mattered. For the first time since the knock at my door, I wasn't replaying what I should have said or fearing what would happen next. I was just standing there breathing, realizing the room had listened, and that listening had changed the air. My phone buzzed. I put it on speaker when the caller ID flashed the Inspector General's office. The voice on the line was steady and formal, but the words landed clean. The task force was live. Funding authorized. A mandatory reconciliation protocol signed into effect. No classified service file could close without human review, cross-agency verification, and a welfare check trigger. The audit would expand beyond the initial 47 cases. Referrals were already moving. A follow-up memo hit my inbox as the call ended, stamped and time-stamped, outlining immediate protections and reporting deadlines. No ceremony, no applause, just the machinery finally turning the right way. I scrolled once, then locked the screen. It felt strange how something so heavy could arrive so quietly. A staff attorney stepped close and said, "You're listed as civilian liaison. Oversight role. You'll be looped on implementation." I nodded. Oversight meant staying. It meant watching the gap so it couldn't open again. Across the hall, a small service table held paper cups, and a silver urn of coffee meant for staff who'd been here all morning. I poured one, added nothing, and took a slow sip. Bitter. Familiar. I reached into my bag and found what I'd brought without thinking, a simple brown paper bag folded tight. Inside, a sandwich, a banana. Habit is a powerful thing. I didn't eat it. I set it on the ledge beneath a window that looked out over the city sunlight, catching dust in the air. Outside, people moved on with their day. Inside, a rule had changed. Not because of a speech, but because a record had finally been read as a person. I stood there a moment longer, then clipped off the badge and slipped it into my pocket. Oversight would come with meetings and memos, but this quiet, ordinary proof was the part I wanted to keep. I picked up the bag, held it once, then placed it back down carefully like a promise kept the same way it started. Small things aren't small, they're how people stop disappearing.